So, which Democratic hopeful would be just the ticket as Joe Biden's running mate? Nicholas Thompson, editor-in-chief of Wired magazine, sizes up the field.
Thank you for running classes.
Back then, before he had to wear a mask to leave his house, before protests convulsed the nation's cities, Joe Biden made a promise.
There are a number of women who are qualified to be president tomorrow. I would pick a woman to be my vice president.
Now it's about time for Biden to make that pick.
How important is Joe Biden's vice presidential pick?
It's very important. It's probably one of the most important things he'll do between now and Election Day.
Alyssa Mastromonaco and Dan Pfeiffer are both known to listeners of Pod Save America. They're ready to debut a new podcast about the vice presidential pick called That's the Ticket. In 2004, Mastromonaco helped lead the search for a running mate for John Kerry. In 2008, she did the same for Barack Obama, a search that led to Joe Biden. Dan Pfeiffer was a senior aide to Obama during his campaigns and in the White House.
There are 5 moments that truly matter in any presidential campaign: the convention speech, the 3 debates, and the vice presidential selection. In this campaign, the convention could happen on Zoom and may not have the impact it normally would. It's not fully obvious that Trump's ever going to debate Biden. So this may end up being one of the most important vice presidential selections in American political history.
A CBS poll released at the beginning of May showed Democratic voters strongly supporting Senator Elizabeth Warren for vice president, almost 2-1 over Senator Kamala Harris, followed by former Georgia State Representative Stacey Abrams and Senator Amy Klobuchar. Trailing them are former Obama administration officials, members of Congress, and governors, all of whom are in the single digits. That was May. This is June.
We're in a moment of intense protest out on the streets. But how does that affect Joe Biden's vice presidential thinking?
You know, in the wake of these protests following the murder of George Floyd, of course, the vice president is watching this. He sees the hurt and the suffering in the country. And of course, I think it plays into his thoughts about picking a vice president.
I think to the extent that there was pressure for diversity on the ticket, that pressure is going to be increased.
Right now, if you understand what's happening on the streets, justice must be an urgent issue. And I think you have to put a candidate on that ticket who is credible in that space.
Cornell Belcher is a longtime Democratic pollster and progressive political strategist. He believes the odds just got a lot longer for Senator Klobuchar, a former prosecutor in Minneapolis, where the killing of George Floyd touched off the protests.
Politics isn't about what's fair. And I can make the argument that this conversation is unfair to Senator Klobuchar, which I actually think it is. But the political reality is, I think she's a harder pick today because if you picked her today, you start off in a position of having to inoculate and explain. Because if you're explaining, you're losing.
So, whose stock has risen?
Senator Harris is larger today than she was a month ago. I don't think there's another sitting senator who's been more vocal and been more spot on in the conversations about inequality and justice and the discrimination that is within the system.
It is time that we say that bad cops are bad for good cops.
Those images of Senator Harris in the protest itself, that's a powerful image. She's presented well at this time.
If you were to say to me, who is the most obvious choice to help you win the election, then I would probably say Kamala Harris. If you ask me who gives you the most upside, the greatest potential to be a game changer, I would say Stacey Abrams. If you ask me who would be the best person to step in as president on day one, it would be Elizabeth Warren.
Alyssa, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Add to the possible shortlist Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, Florida Representative Val Demings, and Susan Rice, who is Obama's national security advisor. All are reportedly being vetted by the Biden campaign.
So give me the one word that should be most important to Joe Biden as he makes his choice.
Electability. Beating Trump.
For the view from a former adversary, we talked with Stuart Stevens, a Republican strategist who ran Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign. Stevens has now joined the Lincoln Project, a group of never-Trumpers who've been putting out ads like this.
Who do you trust, the coward or the commander?
My theory of the race is that it's about non-white turnout intensity. And I think the picking of Harris would play to that. But the not picking of Harris would definitely be a negative for that cause.
There's a school of thought that Biden should be concerned about whether his pick helps appeal to Trump voters. Stevens points out that Trump got less than 50% of the popular vote.
What about all the Obama-Trump voters, people who backed Obama in 2008, 2012, and then Trump in 2016? How do you win them back, and can the vice presidential candidate help with them?
You know, I wouldn't spend a minute thinking about getting anybody who voted for Donald Trump. First of all, if everybody voted, you get 46.1%. Second of all, that's not really true, because a lot of those Trump voters, we don't talk about this because it's kind of morbid, but they're dead. He did very well with older voters. Probably 1 million of those are no longer with us.
I don't want to talk about Trump voters anymore. I don't.
Democratic strategist Cornell Belcher.
If they voted for Trump, God bless them. They're not a swing voter.
So you don't actually think that Biden needs any Trump voters?
If you're thinking about Trump voters, you're dead wrong. It's why we'll lose.
Then there's chemistry. Biden might have a unique perspective on who he'd like beside him as vice president.
Joe Biden, when Barack Obama asked him to be his vice president, cut a deal where Obama agreed to have lunch with Joe Biden, just the two of them, once a week, every week they were both in town. And so I do think Joe Biden is going to think about this in the context of who is the person I want to have lunch with every single week for the next 4 to 8 years of my life. That sounds absurd, but it's also a proxy for the bigger question of, is this a person I can work well together? Will we be partners like Joe Biden was to Barack Obama?
Biden will turn 78 just after the November election. If he wins, he would be the oldest president to ever take office.
Some people think that Biden will be a transitional president. Maybe he'll only serve 1 term. So the candidate he picks as vice president may well be the next Democratic presidential nominee. Should the voters be holding that in account? And should Biden be thinking about that a lot as he makes his choice?
I think voters are holding that in account. It's important that he picks someone that they think can step into the job immediately. Because look, it's uncomfortable, but voters are a little bit worried about Biden's age. But it's important that they actually pick someone who settles that discomfort.
Biden has said he hopes to announce his pick around August 1st. Stuart Stevens believes there's only one thing that should matter: winning.
Is there anybody Biden could choose as vice president who would make you want to sit out the election?
No, he could pick you and I'd vote for him.